appointees officials, and apologies have been received from Deputy Murphy. As we're now in public session, all mobile phones should be switched off, and members are requested to ensure that for the duration of the meeting their mobile phones are turned off completely. I better do that. Or switched to airplane safe or flight mode, depending on the device that they have. It is not sufficient for members to just put their phones on silent mode, as this will maintain the level of interference with the broadcasting system. So the meeting is being convened to consider a supplementary estimate for vote 31, Transport, Tourism and Sport, which was referred by the Dáil to the committee on 21st of November to report back by the 12th of December. And as I said earlier, I'd like to welcome Minister Ross, and he's to speak on the supplementary estimate. I would like also to welcome the officials from the department and to thank you for the briefing you've given us. The format is Minister will make an address or a statement, after which members who indicate who want to speak can question him or comment on that, and then we can consider the estimate. Is that agreed? Agreed. I would remind members that in accordance with standing orders, discussion should be confined to the items under the supplementary estimate heading. So, Minister, I ask you now to make your address, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and I just want to apologise for being late. I'm sorry, I hit an absolutely unavoidable problem on the way in, which was of no makings of my own, but I want to apologise to everybody for that. I'd like to thank you and the committee for this chance to present details of the supplementary estimate for my department. As you're aware, I think you've all got a copy of the advance brief. There are two elements to this supplementary: 6 million from the Irish Aviation Authority dividend and 37.5 million which has been agreed with the Minister for Finance and Public Expenditure and Reform to boost investment across the transport, tourism and sports sectors. Given the IAA's strong financial performance and significant surplus cash reserve, it was agreed that they were sufficiently well funded to pay at least one special dividend. This is in addition to the agreed annual dividend policy of 30% of profits after tax. As part of that agreement, the IAA committed to further special dividends in 2019 and 2020, subject of course to prevailing conditions. As was the case this year, I will consult with Minister Donoghue with a view to retaining a portion of the special dividends to again be reinvested in the work of my department. The second part of the supplementary estimate, 37.5 million, is being allocated for a range of projects. The estimates for 2018 already provide an overall gross allocation to the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport of 2.03 billion. This additional money will now bring the total allocation to 2.07 billion. Our total allocation is used to provide investment in critical infrastructure and to ensure that vital services are available to the public during 2018. I will now briefly go through the areas that are recipients of this additional money. The funding of 1.5 million for aviation will assist the operational grant applications from the regional airports. The majority of this funding focuses on supporting the wage costs for the provision of essential safety and security services. In the public transport area, 5 million has been allocated for bus and Luas investment. This will partly fund bus fleet purchases and partly fund a stage payment for the 8 additional Luas trams that are being purchased under the Green Line Capacity Enhancement Project. 200,000 will go towards an Irish rail accessibility app, which will assist rail users with sensory or mobility impairments. 400,000 will be invested to improve safety of cyclists by installing in cyclist detection systems at junctions. 3 million is for working capital relating to the bus market opening BMO programme, which commenced on the 9th of September. The working capital requirement for bus market opening arises from the gross cost contract arrangement with Go Ahead and Bus Éireann for routes that have been open to competition. In this case, the NTA will collect all fare revenues and carry the associated revenue risk. In the roads area, the main recipient will be the regional and local roads, with an additional allocation of 15.03 million towards road maintenance. As you're aware, in recent years, the impact of severe weather has intensified the vulnerability of an already weak network in need of maintenance and repair. This amount will be allocated to local authorities affected by such events this year under a new special maintenance grant. In addition, 700,000 will also be allocated to regional and local roads for salt purchase. The severe winter just gone resulted in exceptionally high salt usage, so this additional money will ensure there are adequate stocks in place again. National roads will be increased by 3 million to cover winter operations, public lighting and other outstanding maintenance. 7 million will be used for a payment to FBD in respect of the compensation, legal costs and court interest payable on a case from 2009 where a court of appeal found the state had liability. Under the maritime heading, the search and rescue helicopters have been adopted for night vision imaging system and NVIS, and the necessary night vision goggles have been purchased. This system is necessary to improve search and rescue capability. The allocation now in the supplementary estimate of 1.7 million will go towards the provision of training on the use of the night vision imaging system, which will complete the project to adapt helicopters and crews to night vision imaging systems. Under the heading of sport, 1.5 million is being allocated to Sport Ireland for high-performance sport. This funding will be used to assist athletes' preparations for major competitions, including the 2020 Olympic and Paralympic Games in Tokyo and key World and European Championship events. 1.12 million is being provided to Sport Ireland to meet the following costs: 750,000 for the Irish Open Golf, 100,000 for Paralympics Ireland, 120,000 for anti-doping and 150,000 for the Women in Sport programme. Under the tourism heading, 500,000 will be spent by Fortune Ireland, targeting short breaks over the winter specifically to visitors from Northern Ireland. 100,000 will be spent by Fortune Ireland supporting more international publicity. 250,000 will be spent to enhance the programme for the New Year's Festival Dublin, to deliver an even better festival and to attract and grow additional tourist traffic at a time of year when we have spare airline and accommodation capacity. 2.5 million will be spent by Tourism Ireland on a range of tourism marketing initiatives. My department has a vital role to play in Ireland's social and economic prosperity, and I'm pleased to say that this additional allocation, together with the funding committed over the lifetime of the NDP, the National Development Plan, should enable us to build a better Ireland. I am happy to address any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now, I'm in the hands of the committee here as to how you wish to deal with it. The proposal which has been suggested to me is that each member would ask generic questions which they wish on the Minister's statement, then we can go through each heading A, B, C and whatever. Or I'm in your hands, whatever you'd like to do it.
Yes, we just go through heading by heading.
No, that's fine.
That's okay with this.
Yeah.
Because the Minister's statement is just a summarised version of the headings,
I'd
really.
be happy with that. Yeah, no, I would actually, that'd be my personal choice, but everybody happy with that? Okay. So start with Deputy Troy, please.
So the first heading then,
Day 3, regional airports. That's yeah, sorry, it's aviation, apologies, yeah, that's the name. But the overspend, or the additional funding, is 1.5 million in regional airports.
So just in relation to the 1.5 million in regional airports, none of this is for capital work, it's all for the employment of additional personnel. Is that spread across all our regional airports, or is it just in one or two airports in particular? And given the fact that it's current expenditure, will this mean that the annual budget will need to increase by this 1.5 million next year?
Sorry, if Deputy Munster would like to ask a question under that heading A.
Yeah, just in relation to that, the funding of the 1.5 million, is that, Minister, for new hire? It just seems quite strange that a gap of 1.5 million in, how is it possible to end up with a gap of 1.5 million in the space of 1 year? Is it for new hire, or can you explain what's going on there, that it would need a supplement allocation? if, as you say, it's been allocated to cover costs. From a planning perspective, it's worrying, you know, that if it's a 1.5 million gap in wages over just 1 year. Just an explanation for that.
Not on that, on B, I will, yeah, thanks.
Okay. This is spread over all airports, Deputy Troy. And in answer to the question by Deputy Munster, there wasn't really a gap. This money is extra money. This is money which came through mid-year. And what we're talking about 1.5 million for aviation, came from the IAA dividend, right? Which was, in a sense, it was a windfall. And we decided then to distribute it accordingly. And you'll see from the, I think you got the list of how the 6 million was distributed. And where there was need that hadn't been provided for, we provided for. And the regional airports, it's mostly for security, it's mostly for safety and issues like that, where there are needs which mightn't have been fulfilled. But it's a bit of a bonus, actually, rather than something that was left as a deficit.
Minister, is it additional essential safety and security services?
Sorry, is it what?
Is it additional to what was there? Is it new? Are these new?
Yeah.
Safety and security.
Yeah, it's supplementary. It's supplementary. Yeah, it's absolutely additional.
Yeah, no problem. It doesn't say additional there. That's just a point.
Yeah.
So it's not an overspend of what was already being done.
No.
No.
It's money which came in.
That's fine. That's good.
Sorry, if I explain the dividend just in case people don't understand it.
Yeah.
The issue arose when I was speaking to the Minister for Finance over budget negotiations, and he and I agreed that if I can negotiate a special dividend from the IAA, it would obviously be very welcome because it would be extra money, and they were already getting a dividend. And when we agreed that, I went to the IAA and said, look, they had a huge cash pile, enormous amount of money in the bank, that the state could make use of that money rather than have it in the IAA coffers. And they agreed to give us a dividend, all other things being equal, of 12 million per annum. And the Minister of Finance agreed that we would split that 6 million for the Exchequer and 6 million for the department in mid-year. And when that was agreed, we had a certain amount of money extra, which we gave, and 1.5 million of that went to the regional airports.
Just very briefly, if you can at all, perhaps you can just expand on the safety and security concerns that the money's been specifically allocated to. Do you know?
I don't know what the detail is here at the moment, but I can give you some stuff on it. In the note which I think you've got, the majority of the funding focuses on supporting the operational costs for the provision of essential safety and security services. And the point about this, I think, is that it's not money which can never be considered as state aid because it's got no economic benefit. And in other words, it doesn't reveal extra income to the airports, in which case it would be subject to state aid, but it comes within the qualifications, which is security and safety, which is very important.
Yeah, but I asked in terms of, this is, you said, for recruitment of additional personnel at our regional airports in terms of security and safety. So I understand that they're not going to be recruited for a period of a couple of months, just to the end of this year. Will this require the budget for 2019 to increase by 1.5 million to ensure that these supports will be there going forward?
Yeah, the funding is going to go up overall next year. These are. I'm not sure the numbers are at the moment for wages, but it is used for customs. It's used for fire brigades, equipment, and for personnel there as well. So I suppose there'll be an expectation that next year it'll be a little bit higher as well.
And is this to fulfil, I suppose, obligations under Brexit? From a Brexit perspective, you mentioned customs and.
I don't think it's got a Brexit-related issue at all. No.
Could
Not Brexit, no.
If you may not have the details,
It doesn't
if you could give us a note on what would that be helpful to the members?
It's certainly not Brexit related. It's certainly the normal course of events, no.
So if you get a note post the meeting, just identifying what those issues are, if that's okay, Minister.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so that's A. Now we're on to B, which is land transport. So if I keep that order the way we did already, so Deputy Troy, if you wish to ask on. Now we have a number of different items on B. Well, there's 1, 2, 3. There's a load of them. So whichever way I'm in your hands. Will we take each one separately? Do you want to take anything in B together?
Just take these together.
Yeah, no, I'm happy. I'm just conscious that I want to make sure, Deputy, that everybody can ask whatever question they want, and that we're free to do so. Okay, so we take all of B together then. So there's a number of items there: 32, 35, B2, 71, 83, 83, and 85. Okay, so Deputy Troy.
Okay, just a number of questions on B, and I just keep the questions fairly specific. The 5 million for bus and Lewis investment, it said additional 5 million will be assigned partly to bus fleet purchase and partly to stage payment of 8 additional Lewis trams. Can I ask, how many new buses will that acquire? When will they be delivered? And is that part of a replacement of rolling stock, or are these going to be new buses? Can I ask, in terms of the new buses that this money is being used to purchase, are these hybrid buses, or are they still conventional buses? As you know, we have targets to reach in terms of decarbonisation by 2020. Transport, I think, is now, in terms of sectors, is the second largest contributing sector in terms of our climate change, and I think it's very important that we have a clear move away from fossil fuels in terms of transport and to accelerate our migration towards renewable energies. The 200,000 on the Irish Rail Application Act, that's, I think, a very welcome proposal, and as a committee that had the hearings in relation to how we can make public transport more accessible for people with a disability, I think that's very welcome and positive and to be complimented. But in terms of in welcoming that, perhaps you might give a timeline in terms of when that app will be up and running. And given, I suppose, what the intention of the app, will there be an additional requirement to ensure that the necessary personnel and supports will be at the various train stations, that when somebody arrives that the operative assistance will be there? I know from a previous briefing with Irish Rail, we still have a lot of our stations that aren't fully wheelchair and immobile friendly. So while we're putting in this 200,000 for the app, it's welcome. It may raise problems in terms of somebody identifying that they want to travel from a particular station and that station not to be wheelchair accessible. So just perhaps you'd comment on that. The cycling package, 400,000, again, it's small money. We're still well below where we were, Minister, when you took over in terms of our annual spend on cycling, and I wonder when do you envisage that you'll be back at a very minimum at the level of spending the department was spending before you became Minister. Additional road money to be welcome again, but we're still somewhat below our steady state requirement. Have you any indication in terms of when we might be in a position to meet our steady state requirement? Ultimately, the longer you prolong investing in our roads, the more it's going to cost in the long run. And finally, just in relation to the €3 million for the bus market opening, I suppose we were all told that the opening of certain routes was to save money, and now we see that there's a large capital expenditure at the outset. Can I ask what exactly is that 3 million for? Is that towards the provision and purchase of garage facilities, or what is that additional money? And in total, how much money has the department expended on the bus market opening project?
Thank you, Deputy Munster. I'll just go to it. Sorry, yeah.
Just the first point, Minister, the 3 million that you've allocated to the working capital in relation to the bus market opening. I notice you haven't allocated a single bob to PSO, despite the fact that they're in dire need of huge investment. And I think it probably shows the word privatisation. Outsourcing is a means to the end of the end goal of privatisation. But it's very disappointing that you didn't seek to give an allocation when you did get the extra money to PSO, and it shows just you're actually giving more money to speed up the process of privatisation to the detriment of Bus Éireann and our public transport network. You know yourself in doing this, and in when you're outsourcing the most profitable routes, that you're actually every single time and at every stage you're weakening Bus Éireann, you're weakening them as a business model, and you're reducing their revenue to fund to enable them to fund less profitable routes. So I'd like you just to make a statement on that. It's clear that you're actually following this agenda and doing it in stages. The other issue I wanted to raise, I'm surprised, given the fact that it's been in the media so much of late, the increase in or the increasing need for security in our public transport network in Oireachtas and Bus Éireann, in fact, and the number of assaults and attacks from the workers have had to endure. It would have been something I would have hoped there was a particular reason that maybe extra funding couldn't have been given to the networks to provide extra security, given that workers are very vulnerable at this stage, and there's little or no security, or certainly what's there is in no way sufficient. I too would welcome the 200,000 for the to go towards the rail accessibility app, and that's a very good choice of allocation. And I'm just wondering too, when will that funding, that 200,000, be sufficient to have the app up and running, do you think, or will it need extra funding? When will we see that? As you know, we've met, we've had the disability report and the groups in here, and all of them had flagged up just the nightmare of trying to get about your daily business on public transport. And as Deputy Troy said, the lack of staff and the fact that you give the 24-hour notice or 48-hour notice at the weekend, that you literally just can't decide that morning that you're going to make a journey, and the lack of staff on at train stations, and that is part of the problem. So, but the 200,000 is very welcome. There was something else, let's see, but I can come back to it. Okay, thanks.
Okay, sorry, Deputy Coppinger.
Thanks. On the same topic, Minister, I want to ask you about, and I think it's worth actually reading what it says, 3 million is being allocated for working capital relating to the bus market opening programme. It arises from the gross cost contract arrangement with Go Ahead and Bus Éireann for routes that have been opened to competition. In this case, the NTA will collect all fare revenues and carry the associated revenue risk. So, first of all, the announcement by the NTA of further privatisation of Bus Éireann is a real blow to workers and to trade unions who were of the belief that they had an agreement in 2015 that if any further areas were to be opened up for privatisation, a period of time was meant to be given to assess how Go-Ahead has been doing, but now we find out that the taxpayer, and you're meant to be a great guardian of public money, is to hand over 3 million to actually open up the bus route to this private company. So the state will end up subsidising millions to a multinational company, and it will inevitably end up subsidising in corporate welfare for the low pay of the workers that will be employed, because my understanding from talking to members of the MVRU is that Go-Ahead is having a real difficulty recruiting workers, and of course they're on a lower terms and conditions of established workers in Bus Éireann and in Dublin Bus. Now, I don't know if the Minister will dissociate himself and say this is up to the NTA, they're independent, but none of us believes that. I think we see that this payment of 3 million is ideological. And I think that what we should do, because I think this needs further exploration, is bring in the NTA and the unions at some future meeting in the new year to discuss this, because they're certainly of the belief that it's a breach of the agreement that they had, that, you know, before any further routes will be opened, there will be a period of assessment, cost effectiveness of this Go-Ahead, and now here you are doling out more public money to allow the privatisation of these services on worse terms and conditions for the workers. And I assume you're handing them the Dublin to Drogheda routes, Dublin to Wicklow. These will be heavy, you know, commuter belt routes that will be inevitably profitable, cherry-picking services, and leaving Bus Éireann then, who at least, if they have any extra, it goes back into the public, you know, into the economy, whereas these private companies hand it out in dividends to their shareholders. So, you know, Minister, how long is the public purse going to have to subsidise these companies coming in at the taxpayers' expense?
Okay, thank you for that. Just before you answer, Minister, can I say that I very much welcome the things that have been welcomed here, particularly the 15.3 million additional for regional local roads. I think it's very much welcome, and I would think we need to put even more emphasis on that because of obviously potholes and the safety issues. And one issue which concerns me is the, you know, in places like Drogheda, and Deputy Munster will notice when you're coming in from the motorway, when you leave the national primary route, there's no adequate or proper lighting. There's no proper roads indeed there. Like the road network is early 20th century rather than 21st century. So I think any money that's spent, additional money, is very welcome. So, Minister, I fully support the Irish Rail accessibility app. I think that's an important and welcome development. So I'll ask you to answer the questions. Now I want to try and keep them that everybody gets. You get your reply, and they can come back in again if they wish. So,
okay. Let me start with Deputy Troy. Yes, he's right. The 5 million will go towards buses, and it will go towards Lewis, and it'll. Yeah. It'll go to. Sorry, I just got a note here about that. Yeah, to a stage payment. It'll be a stage payment for the due to the growth in passenger numbers, and it'll be a stage payment for the Lewis Green Line enhancement issue, which obviously is a problem area. The revised allocation will enable the NTA to take delivery of extra bus vehicles this year, enabling some of these additional services to be operated with new bus fleet instead of older end-of-life vehicles. Discussions are ongoing with manufacturers as regards delivery scheduling. There is, as the Deputy identified, a great need for new buses and new rail and new darts. And we're moving as fast as we can on that. On the rail issue, we've been making, I think, some progress, but the refurbishment issue, where they went out to tender, proved to be extremely expensive. And they're now looking at the position of buying second-hand ones. That's because, in fact, refurbishing some of the old rail was going to be so expensive that it was almost as expensive as buying new ones. They're now looking at leasing and buying second-hand ones. On the issue of the app, 2019. That would be introduced, I think, in early 2019. That's moving full steam ahead. On the issue of the cycling, I know you say, okay, you say 400,000 too low, it's still not up to that, but it's an extra 400,000 we've got to realise there's an extra 400,000 which we negotiated, which we didn't expect to have in the first place. And that's going towards, as you know, it's going towards trying to prevent accidents in the cycling area. The number of accidents in the cycling area last year was, I think, 15. It was up about 50%. It's fortunately down this year, but we can't depend on that continuing. And we're very conscious of the fact that we obviously need to encourage cycling, and that there is criticism from yourself and others regularly about the numbers of cyclists and the amount of money that we put into cycling. We're putting in a considerable amount. We've made commitments to putting in a great deal more under the National Development Plan, and we have, as I've said before, bought into the cycling story. We know that it's part of the equation which not only helps the environment, it helps the health of the nation, it also will relieve the traffic problem. And to criticise the government on the basis that we're not doing enough in cycling, I think is probably unfair. I think there was a certain reluctance to put money in it at a certain stage, but that has ended. We made very serious commitments under the National Development Plan to treble the amount spent on cycling. We're spending a large amount on greenways. And under the Bus Connects project, we have committed to 200 kilometres of dedicated and segregated cycling ways to run alongside the bus the bus corridors. So the commitment is now there. I suppose it's underlined by the fact that we're spending 400,000 extra as part of this windfall on making the roads and mostly at traffic junctions safer for cyclists, and we intend to continue along that vein. On the Bus Connects market opening, which Deputy Troy addressed as well, I think there's probably a bit of a misconception about this. This isn't just handing it over as some sort of capital or current payment. This isn't just spending it on something which is on go ahead, as one of you said. It's not doing that. This money isn't going to go ahead. This is going to be money which it's a cash flow issue where there's probably going to be a gap in the revenue. And by bringing this forward, we're going to be able to bring the project forward somewhat. But it's certainly not going towards to help go ahead in any way at all. Deputy Munster, privatisation, the end goal. We have had this conversation before. It's not. And it won't be. And what we've got to understand here is that what you call privatisation is not selling anything. Privatisation is only when you transfer an asset from one person to another, one company to another.
Outsourcing.
Privatisation is not happening here at all. What is happening is there is a tendering process going out. And Bus Éireann and Dublin Bus are tendering for all these routes, as far as I know. And also it's open to outside companies as well and to people from outside the state. And the result of that is that they get a contract, which is a contract which they agree for probably 5 years. But they don't get any assets. We're not selling any assets at all. And that's a contract which lasts a limited period of time. And it's an open competition for that. In other words, the state companies do compete for these and have indeed won these tenders as well on occasions and presumably will in the future. And the objective of this is not in any way to privatise anything. It's to introduce more competition in the market and that's in order to benefit the consumer. And competition is obviously healthy. It may not be welcome from the incumbents' point of view. I don't know. But they compete as well, and they compete very successfully. And I suppose we have to realise that part of what's going on here is we've got some very successful bus companies, which you would be very supportive of, which are carrying an awful lot more passengers. And the introduction of new routes and new companies there can only help those passengers and expand the service. And it is expanding the service, not necessarily to the detriment of the incumbents at the moment. So you and I probably differ about our definitions of what privatisation is. You seem to me to believe that the tendering of the routes is privatisation, and it's certainly some of the routes are for a finite period being now run and operated by new companies. Certainly that's true, but no assets are changing hands.
Sorry, Ciarán, just if I could come in on that. Minister, do you accept to say when you put out routes out to tender, okay, that, okay, we accept that Bus Éireann can apply for the tender. Bus Éireann already has the tender, but can apply for the tender, reapply for the tender, if you like, that the chances are Bus Éireann may or may not get it. But when they don't get it, they straight away see a reduction in revenue, because the majority of routes that are put out to tender are the most profitable routes, creaming off the most profitable routes. Therefore, you're weakening and weakening and weakening. Each time a tender goes out, you're weakening our national bus service. And as you know, nobody better than yourself would probably say it's all about business models. Now, if you're weakening our national bus service, then when it comes to applying for contracts that are put out to tender, if Bus Éireann's revenue is down, if they're weakened because some of the most profitable routes have been given out, privatised, then they've less and less chance. So over a period of time, you're doing it in stages, and over a period of time, and it is privatisation. Okay, you're not selling off assets, but the idea of outsourcing to the detriment of our public transport network, that's privatisation by any other word.
Ruth Coppinger, just on the point there, Minister. Sorry,
cash flow issue while capital revenue.
Okay.
If
you don't mind,
it's on the same topic, but
I know that. I'm just bringing you in. I just want to say.
I'll sit patiently and wait. So it's just on the same issue.
Well, I always sit patiently, listen to you. So I hope you do the same for me, Minister. I'm sorry, Deputy. I know. I want to make it very clear that I defend everybody's right to speak properly here, including my own right to ask a question. So I hope you don't mind. The question, Minister, is this: if you could clarify, for the purposes of the debate, is whether these are profit-making routes or not. I understood
they're not the most profitable. They're not the most profitable routes. That's absolutely
that's the whole
clear.
point.
That is not what happens at all. No, they're not profitable.
Sorry, can we just get a bit of order on this? Let's keep it calm. Yeah.
But are they profitable?
They are not profitable. No, they're PSO. They're all PSO routes. They are socially necessary, but financially not viable.
So why would a private company want them, Minister?
That's what they are.
Can I just try and keep handling this? If I try, you know, you forgive me. Everybody asked. Everybody.
We're just
want the Minister.
thing,
I'm sorry, Deputy. You can throw your eyes up to heaven.
I do, yeah, because you're just unnecessarily intervening.
No, not at all. Not at all.
You are.
I'm trying to help you, Deputy. The Minister, I think the key point you need to clarify is the routes that are mentioned here. How many of them are actually PSOs or not? I think that's the question. And Deputy Coppinger,
I think they're all PSO. And they're not the most profitable routes. You know, we've got to make it absolutely clear that there's certain things said here, and I know they're said genuinely, and I know they're said with great conviction, that this is not an issue of just going out and saying you cherry pick the most profitable routes at all. They're not the most profitable routes. They're all PSO, which means that they're not profitable.
Just an point of clarification. I've always said... just an point of clarification.
Hold on a second, please. I want to try and get everybody in, if I may.
Private companies cherry pick the most profitable routes.
Can I ask Deputy Coppinger to ask a question, and then you can get in. Thank you.
Okay. Could I keep replying, or sorry?
Well, I'm happy if Deputy Coppinger wishes to ask questions.
Fine, I'll wait for him.
Should wait for the Minister. Thank you.
As far as I know, there's no reduction in revenue to Bus Éireann or Dublin Bus because they've expanded their services. What's happening in the bus market and the public transport market is quite exciting. It's not something to be knocked. And I think we should welcome the fact that we've got people from outside wanting to enter this route because the passenger numbers, as you'll be aware, are increasing very, very, very fast. And they're increasing as a result of a boom in the economy as well. As a result of that, everybody is benefiting. And it would be wrong to say that, that it is damaging to Dublin Bus. They're expanding their services at the moment because of the increase in passenger numbers, and there is room for incumbents. The great beneficiary here are hopefully, and I think there's evidence of this, are the passengers. And they're the people that we want to see benefit. The introduction of new operators has benefited the passengers. It hasn't created any unemployment at all. And at the moment, the expansion in the demand for public services, public transport services, is being filled by both Dublin Bus, Bus Éireann, and by outsiders, and very successfully. And this competition is working.
Deputy Coppinger.
I think actually, Chair, the reason this is obviously an area of interest for all of us, right?
So, yeah.
I think we need to interrogate this further. None of us here have the figures to hand of the routes that are being spoken of. So we can't actually really get into this. And I think that we need to get those figures. And I think that we need to have the NTA in and have the union representatives in. Because you're claiming that they're not profitable routes. My understanding is that those buses will be packed every day. They will be certainly of the more profitable end.
Got a list of all of those routes.
So we need to get the figures before we actually, and that's the whole point that is being made, that there hasn't been a cost-benefit analysis done of this at all before deciding to just lash them out again. I mean, the claim that it will benefit consumers, well, again, we need to interrogate that. Are you saying the prices will go down? Are you, because generally what happens in the overall sense is that routes that aren't that well, populated lose out. So that's not a benefit to the consumer overall. And lastly, if the Minister could explain what he meant, I took it down. I have a bit of shorthand, but maybe you can. Cash flow issue while a gap in revenue, you said this 3 million was for. You said it wasn't just to help Go Ahead or the private company. I didn't really understand what a cash flow issue while there's a gap in revenue is.
Okay.
Gross cost contract, is that the issue there?
Yeah, sure. I'll deal with that hopefully in consequential order. First of all, 3 million is not going to go ahead. That is just not what happens. It is a cash flow issue. In other words, it's bridging a gap. It's a working capital requirement for bus market opening arises from the gross cost contract to which you referred, Chairman, with Go Ahead and Bus Éireann for BMO routes, whereby the NTA will collect all their revenues and bear the associated revenue risk. In other words, it's a bridge. That's what it's bridging. The working capital requirement is driven by a combination of the timing difference between the contractual payments to the relevant operators and the subsequent drawdown from the department. It includes an amount to mitigate the revenue risk of the annual estimated fair revenue in the event that forecasted revenues are lower than expected. It's a bridging cushion, if you like, but it's certainly not handing over money to Go Ahead. So the 3 million is not going to go ahead.
Finance, will they pay it back?
Who is it going to?
Yeah, it's basically run in this case by the NTA, and the NTA will be holding the bridging finance. It certainly won't be going. To Go Ahead in that sense. It's a timing issue rather than asset.
So it's going to NTA.
Yeah, the NTA will be organising that, as they will. By the way, all the routes on the website are all the routes. On the NTA website are all the routes. You can't ask me to kind of micromanage this in a way that I decide what routes are profitable and what routes are not profitable. By definition, all these are unprofitable because they are PSO routes.
Sorry, just on that, I would support Deputy Coppinger's request that we invite the NTA and...
I just say what the problem we have here is that this is an estimates meeting, so therefore it's only members of the Dáil who can be here. There is correspondence which was received from Deputy Coppinger in relation to that issue, but it can only properly be considered by the joint meeting.
All right, fair enough.
So that's the issue we have.
Yeah, and just
but can I just get clarity on this?
Yeah.
Would it be helpful to help people if the Minister can supply, if he can give it today, if he can't, as soon as thereafter, what these routes are and the PSO, how they're defined? In other words,
I certainly can't supply it today. I don't
No, but hold on a second, Minister. I'm trying to be helpful here.
Sorry, yeah.
No, the question is, there's additional funding being spent here, and the members are entitled to know, I think, as to say what the routes are. It's not what you need to know and whether they're PSO or not. It's not the pointed issue here, I think.
I think at a future meeting we need to have the figures in front of us and question the NTA, and we would like to know exactly where the 3 million is.
Okay, so we take it this way then, that the members, when we get our joint committee, your correspondence will be read, and I presume that would be agreed. So therefore, the issue, is there any other point arising from the debate today? Sorry.
A clarification as well from the Minister, just in relation to the routes that are currently going out to tender, where the Minister said they're not profitable routes. Could we have information concerning what private operators currently have contracts on those existing routes that could have possibly led to those routes in our public transport service now becoming unprofitable because there's an existing contract there with private operators that would have taken from...
The problem I see there is that I could be a private operator, but I'm not getting any funding from the department. The department mightn't even know that I'm there.
No, it's not. I'm not saying anything about the private operator and competition. I'm just looking to see where there are routes where private operators are operating, and we're putting our public network routes out to tender. I want to see if there's private operators currently operating on those routes that may have led in some way to those routes becoming not profitable, as you said there a few moments ago.
The answer is no. The answer is no, there aren't.
Oh, the 100, the 101X Drogheda Dublin.
I am not familiar with that route, but I gather generally that is not the case. I mean, we can check
that's
that.
What I'm asking
We can check that specific route for you.
Well, all of the routes that go out to tender, could we have that? And just if there is an existing if there are other operators operating on those particular routes currently.
Which is how the department know?
Should the NTA give out the contracts?
All those routes are unprofitable. They're all PSO.
But if I want to go on a bus,
they're all unprofitable. So how could they be profitable?
I can do that, can't I?
Yes.
But can the NTA are coming in next week, and I know we can't debate that at the meeting as such, but we can ask them to address that issue. I presume we'll agree to a meeting thereafter.
Tender for unprofitable routes. It just doesn't make any sense.
The PSO is subsidy.
I think there's a misconception here. That just because it's a PSO means it's unprofitable. That's not actually true. It's a public service route, and there's some public service routes that are profitable. And what has been used in the past is their ability to be able to cross-subsidise over from profitable routes to unprofitable routes. And we know what the routes are. They're the 17A, the 33A, the 33B, the 45A, 45B, 59, 63, 63A, 75, 75A, 102, 111, 175, 184 and 185. They're the routes that are currently operated by Go Ahead. We know what they are. They're publicised routes. They're on the website for anybody, including the Minister, to have a look at them, familiarise himself with. The question I have quite clearly today, the €3 million that has been made available for market opening from the taxpayers' money, what exactly is it for? First of all, we were saying because it's only contracted as services, it's for capital expenditure, it's going to be held in, the money is being spent to upgrade state infrastructure. Then we're being told it's some sort of bridge and finance. If it's bridge and finance, certainly any time I got bridge and finance, I had to pay it back. We don't know, we're told then Go Ahead is not getting it, it's the NTA that's getting it, so there's no need for paying anything back. So I'm a little bit confused
Sure.
exactly what the 3 million is for. And I'd like the Minister quite clearly to say, what is the €3 million being spent on?
Okay. That's absolutely fine. Deputy Troy, it is not capital expenditure. And you said, someone said that. I don't know who said that. I just certainly didn't say that.
It says working capital here, I think.
It's working capital.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's going in specifically as working capital, as bridging finance. And that's what it is. It is not money being transferred somehow from the state to a private company. That is not the case. It's going in as working capital. And that's it. It's pure purpose. And I read this very specifically because I asked for this definition. The working capital requirement is driven by a combination of the timing difference between the contractual payments to the relevant operators and the subsequent drawdown from the department. It's bridging. It also includes an amount to mitigate the revenue risk of the annual estimated fair revenue in the event that forecasted revenues are lower than expected. So it's simply a cash flow issue.
It is being paid to go ahead.
It's not being paid to go ahead, is it? No.
Go ahead and going to draw down the money, but before it comes in the interim, this goes to the NTA to pay them. Is not it? Is that?
So the NTA, so it's going. It's going to the NTA on to go ahead. So while it's not going from your department directly to go ahead, it's going to the NTA to pay go ahead.
It's not actually transferring to go ahead permanently.
But
it's a cash flow issue, which you have in
does this
any.
make sense? The go ahead are due a sum.
Yeah.
And the money goes to the NTA to pay that. It's not it.
So go ahead are the net beneficiaries of this money.
People can see.
Can I just ask the official to clarify this, if you want to, because I think it's very important. It's cash
committee.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, I have no issue with him speaking. I presume everybody is happy with that. Go ahead.
Okay. So, just to point out, there is a working capital requirement in the NTA required for this because Go Ahead, there's a contract between NTA and Go Ahead. Payment has to be made to Go Ahead, but the payment falls due in advance of monies being transferred from the overall PSO pot from the department. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is that this is a gross cost contract, so it's not like the Dublin bus contract. In the case of Dublin Bus Éireann, they collect all the fare revenue and they keep the fare revenue, and then the difference between their costs and the fare revenue is the PSO payment to those operators. Excuse me. In the case of the Go-Ahead contract and also the Bus Éireann contract for Waterford, the two Go-Ahead contracts, it's a gross cost contract, so the NTA collects the fare revenue. The Go-Ahead does not keep the fare revenue. They are paid an amount to provide the particular services. So fare revenue is only estimated, so there's a revenue risk there for the NTA. Maybe the fare revenue might not be as robust as they initially forecasted. So for that reason, they need to hold a working capital within the NTA to counter that. And that's the reason for the working capital.
Okay, members?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, right. So is everyone how it would be then? We finished that. Sorry. Apologies.
We focused on that predominantly in the to and fro, but there was a number of questions I asked the Minister.
Yeah. No, we get to the answer to the questions.
Which weren't replied to, and that is in terms of the 5 million for Bus and Lewis investment. Can I ask exactly how many new buses will this deliver? Will these buses be hybrid buses? And in terms of the 8 additional Lewis trams, when were these ordered and when will they be delivered? I asked in relation to the accessibility in Irish rail stations, the number of rail stations that aren't fully accessible, and while the 200,000 is most welcome, have we quantified or costed what it will be to make all our Irish rail stations? You were at the briefing the same as I with Irish Rail. Chairman, you know that they have a big problem in terms of accessibility in their rail stations, and it's going to take a significant capital investment to address that. Sure. So while it's welcome, the app, but if we're bringing people to a station and are not able to facilitate them when they arrive, that's another question. And in relation to the cycling budget, Minister, it's your figures, not mine. You're not spending what was being spent by your predecessor. In 2015, the annual cycling budget was 18 million. Last year, it was just over 10 million. So I'm talking about the 400,000. It's welcome. You say it's not, you're critical of me for being critical that it's not enough, but we're not at where the department was at before you came to office. I welcome the fact that you say you're a late conversion to cycling and you've bought into it now. That's positive. But maybe you'd demonstrate your buy-in in terms of giving back the money that your department reduced in the last 2 years to cycling infrastructure.
Okay, Minister.
Yeah, on the low emission issue, the National Development Plan commits to a transition to low emission buses, including electric buses, for the urban bus fleet, with no diesel-only buses purchased from July 2019.
Asking about the 5 million.
Yeah. Okay.
How many of them? I'm not talking about from 2019.
Fairness, Deputy, the Minister's entitled to be given.
Okay. Purchased from July 1919 in line with the Bus Connects programme. These buses that are now we're now transitioning to a green fleet for public transport, including electric buses for the urban public bus fleet, with no diesel-only purchases, as I said, from July 2019, while promoting commercial bus service, the small public service vehicle industry pursue low-emission fleet. The latest buses may be the last diesel-only buses ever purchased. That is our intention.
So the 5 million that's been allocated now, how many new buses?
How many what?
How many new buses will that deliver? The 5
We don't know. We don't know that figure at the moment.
You don't know?
No, we don't know.
And you can confirm that because they're being delivered prior to 2019, there will be diesel buses?
I think so. I think so. Yeah.
That's regrettable. That's very regrettable, given as a country we're leaving ourselves wide open to fines from the EU for failing to meet our targets in 2020. We haven't a hope in hell of meeting our targets in 2020.
It's very regrettable, but it's under the current contract, I think, that we have to do it. It is very regrettable, of course, but that's why we are actually, from July 2019 taking this initiative.
Everybody happy there? Okay, we move on to see now Maritime Administration and IRCG. Any questions there?
Back to me about the accessibility about the various rail stations. I'd appreciate that to hand today.
Maritime Administration, any questions? Okay, if we move on to D5 then, Sport Ireland, any questions?
Administration, can I just ask quickly in relation to this, I suppose based on a report that was done on the Irish Coast Guard following the tragedy last year where 4 people lost their lives.
Yes, tragedy,
chairperson, and a report was done. All the recommendations in that report, this additional funding, will that be sufficient to ensure all recommendations will be implemented? And have you set a timeline, Minister, for the officials to ensure that each and every one of those recommendations are implemented?
Any other question on that heading? Okay, Minister.
Just a second, sorry.
Can I just go into committee for a moment, please, if it's okay? It's just, I was waiting for the Vice Chair to come in. I've been asked to do this, this RT programme. I have to go into, that's my problem, so I'll have to give over the Chair shortly. But the Vice Chair isn't here. So, pardon? Will you mind doing it? Yeah, no, I agree. If you don't mind, that's where I'm going. So if I go, yeah, is that okay? Will I go now then? Do you want to take it now, if that's okay? And I apologise for that. We're still in committee, so then we'll go into public and I'll be gone. You'll be happy I'll be gone when it's road.
No, I'd be nice to see you back.
Which if he does on.
Certainly to implement all those recommendations. Yeah.
But have you set a timeline?
We will certainly act in accordance with any timelines set by the report.
Conscious now, I'm now under chair, so I don't want to abuse the position, but I think it needs from you, Minister, to set a clear time frame for
I
implementation.
just tell you it will be, obviously because there are safety implications in these issues, that we will implement them as soon as we possibly can.
And is the supplementary budget that's been allocated sufficient to ensure that they are implemented?
The supplementary budget, you're talking about the 1.7 million for the training for the pilots?
For the budget
You're
that's,
talking about the 1.7 million for the pilot training, I presume?
If you put that toward our general budget,
Maritime Administration.
Yeah. We will have sufficient money with the general budget, which is going to the Coast Guard.
So actually, sorry, my mistake, there's no additional money, supplementary budget, then funding under this subhead for the implementation of the report.
There's 1.7 million to fund training,
Yes.
okay, for night visions goggles, and that's coming out of the IAA dividend, and that will be sufficient for the training. And we believe that all the recommendations will have sufficient resources for.
So there was no need for supplementary resources?
There's need for supplementary resources.
For this, but not for the implementation of the report?
We don't believe so.
Okay. Okay, we'll move on to the next subhead. D5 is sport.
Yeah, I just have a question. So I suppose the thing that really stood out here was the fact that 1.12 million is being allocated to Sport Ireland, but of that 750,000 is going to the Irish Open Golf. To compare it, 100,000 is going to Paralympics Ireland, and for women in sport, the entire women in sport programme is getting 150,000. I'm just wondering why golf, which is a very rich, wealthy sport, needs such a subsidy. And also the Irish Open Golf in particular, I was just trying to look up. It's also sponsored by Dubai Duty Free, I believe. Or it was last year. Is that the same again? And, you know, the prize money for golfers is just stratospheric, out of this world. So I'm just wondering why the taxpayer has to fund the Irish Open Golf to the tune of 750,000, while the Women in Sport programme, for example, gets 150,000. And obviously the Paralympics get even less than that. Again, it's just this thing about well-funded sports with well-heeled people taking part in them seem to enjoy quite a lot of subsidies and grants in the sports sector. And I don't see how the Irish Open needs a handout from the public purse.
Okay. Do you want to deal with that now? Yeah. Yeah, the Irish Open is getting 750,000 and Paralympics 100,000. This is a decision, as you know, made by Sport Ireland. That's what they're there for, is to make decisions like that. And perhaps you could ask them what that is. I have every confidence in Sport Ireland and what they're doing. I see.
We're agreeing with it, I'm just saying.
But I do see the point that I do understand the point that you're making. The funding, it represents an increase of 250,000 on the level of funding provided in 2018. The money being provided to Paralympics Ireland is to meet a cost overrun from the hosting of the World Para Swimming European Championships at the National Aquatic Centre in August 2018. The circumstances behind that are that on April the 5th, 2018, Sport Ireland were contacted by Paralympics Ireland with a request for support in delivering the 2018 European Para Swimming Championships. Paralympics Ireland stated they were experiencing significant financial challenges in the hosting of these championships, which were due to be held in Dublin from the 13th to the 19th of August. These financial challenges centred on two areas: transport and accommodation, which were mostly due to costs escalating since the bid stage in August 2014. They requested an underwriting agreement to the value of 140,000 from the Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport. This support was requested to ensure that the financial viability of the event and to eliminate any risk of event cancellation, the effects of which would be very significant for Paralympics Ireland and the Irish sports sector. It's now anticipated that the drawdown will be closer to 100,000. In meeting this request, Sport Ireland noted that Paralympics Ireland would provide an additional 100,000 and the International Paralympic Committee would provide an additional 150,000. With the provision of these additional funding streams, Paralympics Ireland delivered a successful championship. So I think they probably met what they needed at that time. On the Irish Open golf, I suppose it's a somewhat different issue to the issue of golf clubs. I think the issue of golf clubs is something which I appreciate that the Deputy has an interest in, and there is obviously a very wide debate about whether
I've very little interest in it actually, but
yeah, golf clubs should be. There's a wider debate about whether golf clubs should be supported with state money if they've got a lot of their own funds. The Irish Open Golf is obviously a very big national event which does need and merits support if it's going to benefit the economy and bring tourists into the country.
Just on that, I mean, I wasn't querying the Paralympics. I was actually drawing a contrast between the amount of money being allocated to Irish Open Golf, women in sport. The entire programme gets, a fifth of what the Irish Open is getting. I know it brings in tourists, and I'm not adverse to golf being, people like it, etc. What I'm talking about is this particular competition. Massive prize money. Do we know what the prize money is? Are we going to subsidise, something that's very well subsidised and funded as it is? There's lots of events that bring people in to the country, the marathon and so on.
Yeah, and some of them need a large amount of funding. The marathon obviously needs a different amount of funding from the golf. But I wouldn't underestimate the extraordinary success which we have in bringing sports people from all over the world to Ireland now, and the Irish sport, and the events that we are holding and plan to hold, not just in golf but in soccer, which is noted the weekend, and in other sports which are going to benefit the whole nation. Okay.
Deputy, you okay?
Yeah, well, just on a separate thing, I mean, I do understand what you're saying about Sport Ireland make the decisions, but we are sitting here kind of endorsing that decision by allocating the funds, so we are entitled to question that.
Sure.
And I just wanted, I totally agree with supporting people trying to reach the Olympics, etc. And I know there's grants available that are separate to this, that would benefit clubs on an individual level. But it's just about the decision, like women in sport, it's been highlighted a lot this year, has been, like the women's hockey team was highly successful. The soccer team as well was certainly probably more successful than the men's, really. So it just seemed to be quite little that was being allocated by Sport Ireland. So whenever the officials are in meetings with them, these are the things that they need to ask about.
Deputy, if I could just ask, I suppose, and I'd agree with what Deputy Coppinger said, is the perception looks quite poor that we're only given 150,000 additional funding to women in sport. Can I ask, I'm conscious though this is a supplementary estimate, so can I ask, what does this supplementary bring the actual 2018 figure to? And as an overall percentage of the expenditure, the sports expenditure, how much, what percentage is geared towards women in sport? Just, I suppose, I'd hate it for to go out here just also the perception that golf is elitist. I know from my own county there are many small golf clubs that are doing huge work, great work with underage or juvenile golfers, and I suppose any child or any teenager, you know, should have the availability to participate in whatever sport of their choice. So just like to make that point. And finally, as this money is coming from a special dividend, or proportion of it is coming from a special dividend, as you acknowledged yourself, Minister, from the IAA, are we confident that this money will be available for the various sporting bodies next year?
Okay. If I could deal with Deputy Pottinger first, I mean the point she's making is fair. That you know, we should examine in detail, which we do, the proportionate amounts given to these various organisations. I think we should note, I know there's 150,000, this is of the supplementary estimate given to women in sport, but and she rightly points out that superficially certainly that is only a fifth of what's given to golf. We did double the funding for women in sport programme to 2 million. We also in the area of disability, we created a 1 million new programme for disability sport through the deployment of Sports Inclusion Disability Officer in all 26 LSPs countrywide. And obviously we gave a 1.5 million allocation to high performance programmes in support of the Tokyo 2020 preparations. Women's, I think we've certainly acknowledged by the grant there in the supplementaries to out of the IAA dividend to women's hockey at 500,000. Also the tremendous success of Irish women's sports, Irish women in sports in the last year, and the support that we're going to continue to give them in the future. And that's something where we had a bit of catch up to be doing. That's readily acknowledged, and we're attempting to do it. We're determined to do it. On Deputy Troy's, I think Deputy Troy, you've got a good point there, that golf is always painted as very elitist, and it is in many clubs. It's only open to better off people to play it, and to play it at a high level. But there are pitch and putt. You know, there's pitch and putt all around the country, and that is something which should be acknowledged. And those people derive a huge amount of benefit for their health and mental health from pitch and putt, and you find it in every village in Ireland. So it's not just an elitist sport that shouldn't be encouraged in the same way as anyone else, any other sport. It works at all sorts of levels, and we mustn't forget that high performance is one thing, big events are another thing, but participation at a village and street level is more important. I have no hesitation in saying that whereas we all applaud the great achievements of our sportsmen and sportswomen around the world, and the great medals they brought back, and the great titles and the great achievements they have, the real benefit of sport to the nation are the young boys and girls that you see every weekend out there getting huge benefit to their mental health, to their physical health, and keeping them, pursue what are extreme, keeping them away from other pursuits which mightn't be so good for them. And that is the great benefit of sport and participation. participation, I think, is equally important, probably much more important for the health of the nation than the medals, which we applaud as well. The medals are important, the icons are very important as well, to have people who are great achievers, but to have on the ground real activity of a large number of people and a large amount of participation is something which in our sports policy, which we emphasised. Which we emphasised with I think, with equal, if not more, emphasis than weight than the achievements of high performance.
Sorry, Chair, just to say, we're not talking about pitch and putt clubs. We're talking about giving 750,000 to one event, of which the winner prize money is, and I just checked it out, $1.116 million, whatever that is in euro, and there's a $7 million prize fund in total. So we're not talking about helping people with their mental health. We're talking about subsidising very well-paid people. You know, that's all I'm saying. And if we're giving out money to one event, my question is, do they need it? This is run by Rory McIlroy. It's subsidised by Dubai Duty Free. I'm not going to labour the point, but just don't be pretending that it's for like village pitch and putt clubs.
I wasn't attempting to do that at all. Not for 1 second. Not for 1 second. I was just trying to say that at the street level it was equally important. But not to just dismiss the open club, because obviously the tourism and the benefits of that for Ireland are very high. Deputy Troy, I haven't worked out the percentage that is, but we can do it very easily. It's extra money. The 51.6 million goes to sports in general, so whatever this is a percentage of that would be easy enough to work out.
I was asking what it brings the total expenditure for this year to women in sport, and what that expenditure then is as a percentage of the overall budget. I imagine that would be well known.
I'll come up with that figure for you. I haven't got it here, but I'll produce it for you, yes, certainly.
And I asked in relation to, and I concur with Deputy Coppinger in terms of when we are spending the level of additional funding, the perception is very bad that the level of funding we're spending on the Irish Open vis-a-vis Paralympics, Anti-Doping and women in sport, and that's why I was using the example of women in sport in terms of the overall expenditure this year. How much are they getting from the department? And this is IAA funding. This is funding that was, as you acknowledged yourself, Minister, a windfall. Will this windfall be available next year? And in the event that it's not available next year, is the women in sport going to suffer a reduction? Is high performance sport going to suffer a reduction in their funding?
They certainly won't suffer. This is, you know, I can't guarantee that that dividend will be available next year, but we anticipate that it will. In other words, the expectation is quite simply that we get the same 12 million per annum, and 6 million will come to the department, but it's not certain. It depends on the conditions of the IAA at the time. But if they're similar to what they are at the moment and what they were when we got the last dividend, I anticipate that we'll get the same dividend. Because
I'm just interested to know how much money are we spending on women in sport?
Sorry? I'm
just interested to know, as a percentage of our overall budget, how much money we're spending on women in sport.
Yeah, I told you I'll get you that figure. I'm not sure.
But what's the overall budget for this year? We should have it. We're doing the estimates.
It's 51.6 million goes to these sports in general.
And how much of that is women in sport?
Dedicated to women in sport. We subsidise a sports club, for example. The women of that sports club benefit as well. So it's 1 million directly.
Yeah, I mean, specifically for women in sports, it's 1 million, right? But obviously, if we're paying money to sports in general, as we are in the case of many clubs and elsewhere, women would benefit as well. So it's somewhat more difficult to say specifically for women what goes. It's a certain amount, but but they obviously benefit from the general funds that go to women's sport as well.
We're talking about 2%, talking about increasing women's participation.
That's specifically.
It's pittance.
And it is doubling next year. So it's doubling. That's what is important.
To 3.8%. Deputy Coppinger, are you happy enough? Yeah. The next... Programme E tourism, Deputy Coppinger.
Sorry. That's it. No, it's fine.
Deputy Coppinger's okay. Look, I welcomed additional funding that's been allocated. I think, in particular, the Great Britain market has been challenging for Ireland in the wake of Brexit. Our numbers have fallen, so it's positive that additional funding is being allocated. It's a little bit outside what we're talking about here, but in terms of the additional funding that was secured under the 2019 budget, can I ask, Minister, has he engaged with the key stakeholders to ensure that the necessary supports are put into the various regions that are going to, I suppose, be most adversely affected by the reintroduction of the 13.5% VAT rate?
Yeah, thank you for your remarks. I think the achievement in tourism is phenomenal, considering the drop in the currency in the UK as a result of Brexit, and the fact that the number of visitors from Britain has actually gone up this year, despite the fact that we've suffered so much on currency movements. And that is due to a large number of factors, obviously. I mean, obviously tourism worldwide is increasing, but there have been some very, very effective marketing campaigns by both the state agencies. And tourism is flourishing, and the problems of tourism are the problems of success, and they're the problems of not having enough hotel bedrooms and accommodation to necessarily meet the demand of those people coming in. But we anticipate that the money that's been given will be spent very, very wisely, and it will be spent not just in diversification, but in also defending the British market. And the signs are that so far that's happening. So we anticipate a great deal of further success this year and next year in the tourism industry. On the 13.5% VAT, which you mentioned, yeah, it was a disappointment, but we don't anticipate that it will result in some sort of permanent downward movement in the tourism industry because of the 35 million that has been granted to give incentives and to promote marketing by Forge Island and by Tourism Ireland. We believe that that will be sufficient to keep the tourism numbers at a very, very healthy level. Will there be supports for the regions? Yes, the Deputy will be aware of the fact that in his own region, the Hidden Heartlands is something to which the tourist industries are fully committed and the government's fully committed, and we anticipate that will increase in the coming years. It's the last geographical branding that the country has, and it now means the whole country is actually covered by some sort of a message, which has been very, very successful strategy by the tourist agencies and by ourselves. And the supports that are necessary will be put in place, certainly. That's why the money's been provided, and the money's been provided to give incentives and to make life more successful, obviously, for those who may suffer from the difficulties which Brexit produced for the tourist industry. But the signs at the moment are that we will be able to fight it successfully.
Well, I just asked that you would engage with the key stakeholders because, you know, there are regions that are not benefiting to the same extent as others, and I think you'd acknowledge that yourself, and have greater challenges than others. And while the extra money was achieved and to be acknowledged, it's important that the supports are put there and to make sure that industry and stakeholders are consulted so the best supports are put in place.
Okay, yeah, the department has already been taking part in roadshows with the key stakeholders, and that's been going around the country in promoting the issues which you've actually mentioned.
So that concludes the consideration of supplementary estimates for the public services for the year ended 31st of December 2018 for vote 31, Department of Transport, Tourism and Sport. In accordance with Standing Order 90, a message to that effect will be sent to the Clerk of the Dáil. Okay. As there is no further business, the meeting stands adjourned.